The prison sat deep in the heart of Nevada, a place surrounded by nothing but miles of sand, wind, and silence. From the outside, it looked like a concrete fortress that time had forgotten. Gray walls, barbed wire shimmering under the sun, and guard towers that watched everything without blinking. Inside, the air was different, thick with sweat, fear, and the faint sting of bleach that never quite masked the smell of metal and anger. It was the kind of place where you could feel violence before it even happened. On most days, the rhythm of prison life was predictable. The morning count, the clang of gates, the shuffle of boots down the corridors, the hollow laughter from men who had long forgotten what it felt like to be free. Everyone had a role. Some followed the rules, some pretended to, and others made their own. Power didn't come from strength alone, it came from reputation, and reputation here was worth more than money. Among those who ruled the yard was Darrell "Brick" Matheson. The name fit him perfectly, thick-necked, broad-shouldered, and built like a wall. Brick had been locked up for over a decade, and during that time he had built an empire within those walls. He controlled the laundry crew, had guards slipping him favors, and demanded respect from every newcomer. If someone wanted protection, they paid him. If someone disrespected him, they paid in blood. Nobody challenged Brick because everyone knew what happened to those who tried. Brick wasn't a mindless thug, though. He had a way of reading people, knowing who was weak and who could be broken. He picked his targets carefully, never the ones who would fight back hard enough to make trouble, but the ones whose fear he could smell. His control wasn't just physical, it was psychological. He liked watching men crumble, seeing the fire leave their eyes after a few days under his rules. But prisons change, and now and then something new disrupts the fragile balance. That day it came in the form of a quiet new inmate. No one knew his name yet, just that he had been transferred from another state and didn't talk much. When he stepped off the bus, the yard stopped to look. He was tall, dark-skinned, and carried himself with a distinct confidence, not cocky but steady. There was a calmness in his eyes that didn't fit the place. He didn't move like most new inmates, the ones who tried too hard to act tough or the ones who walked fast to avoid trouble. He walked slowly, like someone who'd already seen worse than this. His silence wasn't weakness, it was control. But in a place like this, silence could be dangerous. To men like Brick, it looked like disrespect. The whispers started early. Some said he was a military man, others guessed he was in for murder. The guards didn't say much, but one of them, an older officer named Dawson, couldn't help but notice how the newcomer's eyes scanned every corner of the yard as if mapping it. "That one's not like the others," Dawson muttered to a coworker. "He's measuring everything." The first few days passed quietly. The new inmate kept to himself, ate alone, and didn't join any crew. In prison, that kind of isolation was an invitation for trouble. It made you look weak. Brick noticed it too. From his usual seat in the cafeteria, his throne, as the others called it, he watched the newcomer eat in silence, eyes fixed on his food, unbothered by the stares. "Fresh meat thinks he's better than us," Brick said one morning to his crew, his tone dripping with amusement. "We'll fix that." There was a laugh from his right-hand man, a lanky guy named Crow. "You want me to handle it?" he asked, eager for approval. Brick shook his head slowly. "Not yet. Let him settle in, then we'll welcome him the right way." Everyone at that table knew what that meant. Brick had a routine for breaking in new inmates, especially the ones who thought they didn't need protection. A few threats, a shove in the yard, maybe a beating in the showers if they still didn't learn. The guards usually looked the other way, especially when it was Brick. What no one knew, not Brick, not Crow, not the guards, was who this new man really was before he came here. His file, sealed tighter than most, told only part of the story. He had a record, yes, but it was what came before that made his presence here almost unreal. Years ago, he had been one of the most feared fighters in the world, an undefeated MMA champion known for his precision, his control, and his silence. But that part of his life was buried now, erased from public memory after one brutal night that ended his career and his freedom. In this prison, he was just another number. No one recognized him because his name had been wiped from headlines years ago. The face that once appeared on posters and in interviews was now hidden behind a beard and a layer of time. As days passed, the tension began to build. Brick's men started testing him, small things at first. A shove in line, a stolen tray, a taunt whispered under their breath. The new inmate didn't react. He didn't look scared, just detached. That calmness started to bother people. In a place fueled by fear, someone who didn't play the game disrupted everything. At night in his bunk, he could hear the whispers from the other cells. The laughter, the plotting, he knew what was coming. He'd seen men like Brick before, bullies who mistook cruelty for power. He didn't want trouble, not anymore. But trouble had a way of finding him, and in this place you couldn't run from it. Outside, the desert wind howled against the metal fences. Inside, Brick's crew was getting ready for what they thought would be another easy show of dominance. They didn't know they were about to pick a fight with a man who had spent his life mastering the art of violence, and now had nothing left to lose. The prison was quiet that night, too quiet, the kind of quiet that comes before everything changes. The morning started like any other, count, chow, yard time, but there was a quiet tension hanging in the air, something sharp and invisible that everyone could feel. It began with stares, small words exchanged under breath, and the sound of Brick's laughter echoing off the cold walls. The new inmate, whose name the guards finally confirmed as Marcus, moved through the routine like he'd done it all his life. He didn't talk much, didn't smile, didn't react. That calmness, that unshakable control, was what made Brick hate him most. Brick lived off fear. It was his fuel, his power. When a man refused to give him that, when he couldn't see the tremble in the eyes, the hesitation in their voice, it got under his skin. Marcus didn't even flinch when Brick's men bumped into him at lunch, knocking his tray to the floor. He just picked it up, wiped the spill, and walked away. No words, no anger, just silence. Crow laughed the loudest that day, calling after him, "Hey, new guy, you dropped something? Maybe your pride." The cafeteria was filled with laughter, but Marcus didn't look back. That silence, that refusal to even acknowledge them, cut deeper than any insult could. Brick slammed his hand against the table. "He thinks he's too good for us. That ends tonight." From that moment, the plan began to take shape. But before Brick could make his move, something unexpected happened. One of the guards stepped in. Officer Dawson, the older one who had noticed Marcus's composure, called him aside during work duty. "You keep to yourself, huh?" he asked, watching Marcus stack laundry carts in silence. Marcus gave a small nod. "Smart move," Dawson said. "Just be careful. Matheson's been looking your way. He doesn't like quiet ones. Thinks it means you're hiding something." Marcus didn't answer. He just kept working, his jaw tight, his eyes focused. Dawson lingered for a moment longer, studying him. There was something in Marcus's stare, controlled, cold, but not empty, like someone who'd learned to lock everything behind an unbreakable wall. "Whatever you're hiding," Dawson said quietly, "you might want to keep it buried. Men like Matheson dig until they find what scares you." Marcus paused, then finally spoke. "He won't find it." His voice was low, steady, almost too calm. Dawson just nodded and walked away, a chill crawling up his spine. Later that day, Brick's men tried again. Crow and two others cornered Marcus in the laundry room, thinking the noise from the machines would cover it. They taunted him, shoved him against the wall, waiting for the usual reaction, a plea, a threat, something, but Marcus didn't fight back. He just stared at them, expressionless. His silence made Crow hesitate, even laugh nervously. "You deaf or something, man?" Then Marcus spoke, his voice quiet but sharp. "You done?" Something about the tone stopped them for a second. It wasn't fear or anger, just certainty, like someone stating a fact. They left him alone that day, but not for long. Brick wasn't used to waiting. That night in the cell block, Brick sat on his bunk, staring at the wall, thinking. The more he thought about Marcus, the more it ate at him. He'd built his entire world on control, being the one others feared. But this man, this quiet nobody, was shaking that foundation without even trying. Brick's right-hand man, Crow, tried to ease him. "He ain't worth the trouble, Brick. Probably won't last long anyway." Brick turned to him slowly. "You don't get it. Every man here knows who runs this place. The second someone forgets, this whole thing falls apart." Crow didn't argue. He knew Brick wasn't just angry, he was scared. Not of Marcus himself, but of what Marcus represented, the loss of power. Outside the cell, whispers spread. Some said Marcus had been a soldier. Others said he'd killed someone in the ring. A few even claimed he'd snapped a man's neck with his bare hands. Every version made him sound less human, more legendary. And the more the stories grew, the less control Brick had. In a place where fear ruled, Marcus's calm became its own kind of weapon. Men started watching him differently. Some nodded at him in respect. Others kept their distance. Even a few of Brick's own men started wondering if maybe it was smarter not to mess with him. That shift didn't go unnoticed. Brick could feel it. The eyes that once followed him now lingered elsewhere. His pride couldn't take it. He needed to prove he was still king. Meanwhile, Marcus tried to stay invisible, but the walls were closing in. Every day brought another test. A missing shirt from his bunk, spoiled food on his tray, a lock jammed in his cell door. Each act of petty cruelty was meant to draw him out, but he stayed still. He had a rule, never start the fight, but always finish it. At night he'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying old memories. The sound of the crowd chanting his name, the glare of lights above the cage, the blood on his gloves. And then, the night it all ended. The fight that wasn't supposed to go that far. The one that left a man dead. He trained his whole life to control violence, but that night it controlled him. Now he was paying for it, not just with prison time, but with the ghosts that followed him everywhere. He wanted peace, but peace didn't live here. Not in a place built to break men. Brick's pressure wasn't just about ego, it came from higher up too. A rival gang had started to test his control in the yard, and the guards had cut off some of his deals after a recent fight. His world was cracking. He needed a win, something to remind everyone that Brick Matheson still ruled this place. Marcus became that symbol. The guards saw it coming, even if they pretended not to. Dawson warned him again during laundry duty. "Matheson's got eyes on you, son. Don't walk alone after lights out." Marcus looked up. "You think I'm afraid of him?" Dawson shook his head. "No, I think you're afraid of yourself." The words lingered. Marcus didn't answer, but something flickered behind his eyes, a mix of guilt and restraint. As the days passed, the tension became unbearable. Even the other inmates felt it, watching the invisible war build between the two men. One morning in the yard, it finally came close to breaking. Brick stood near the pull-up bars, watching Marcus work out alone. "You got a death wish, new guy?" he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Marcus didn't answer. Brick stepped closer, smirking. "You hear me? I asked you a question." Marcus paused mid-push-up, then rose slowly to his feet. For a moment the yard went quiet. Two men, surrounded by dozens, facing each other. Brick's grin widened. "What's wrong, cat got your tongue?" Marcus met his eyes. "You talk too much." The words were quiet but heavy, and the reaction was instant. The yard buzzed with whispers. Brick's smirk faded. For a second he didn't move, then he laughed, loud and ugly. "You got balls, I'll give you that, but this ain't the cage, champ, this is my yard." Marcus turned and walked away. Brick's fists clenched, his jaw tightening. That single act, walking away, was the worst insult of all. After that, there was no going back. Brick began planning something bigger, something public. He wanted to humiliate Marcus, to remind everyone who ruled. Crow and the others whispered about setting him up in the showers or catching him off guard during work duty. But Marcus knew. He could feel it coming. Every instinct honed from years in the ring told him that the fight was inevitable. And deep down, a part of him, the part he'd tried to bury, almost wanted it. Because the truth was, Marcus wasn't just avoiding violence. He was afraid of what would happen when it came out. The control he'd mastered in the cage, the discipline that once made him great, was built on a thin wall between rage and reason, and Brick was pushing him closer to breaking it. One night, as the lights dimmed and the cells locked down, Marcus sat on his bunk, staring at his hands. He remembered his old coach's words, "Violence isn't power, control is." He closed his fists slowly, breathing deep. Somewhere in the distance, he could hear laughter, Brick's voice echoing down the hall, calling his name. The line between survival and destruction was getting thinner by the day, and when it finally snapped, there would be no turning back. The next morning, a storm rolled in over the desert. The sky turned dark, thunder rumbling across the empty plains. Inside the prison, the air felt charged, electric. Everyone knew it was coming, the clash that would decide who really ruled behind those walls. And when it did, there wouldn't be any witnesses left untouched. The night it happened, the prison felt different. The rain outside hit the windows like a drumbeat, steady and hard. The air inside was thick and restless. You could feel it in the walls, the way the lights flickered, the way the guards spoke quieter than usual. Even the inmates, usually loud and careless after lights out, seemed to sense something coming. The storm outside was nothing compared to the one about to break within. Brick had been waiting for this night. He'd spent days planning it with his crew, whispering through the bars after lockdown, timing the guards' rotations, finding the blind spots in the cameras. Everything was set. Marcus would be on cleaning duty in the lower corridor alone. That was where they'd do it. Quick, brutal, final. The guards didn't care much who got hurt as long as it didn't happen on their shift, and Brick knew it. He'd paid one of them a pack of smuggled cigarettes to forget to patrol that section for 10 minutes. 10 minutes was all he needed. Down in the corridor, the hum of fluorescent lights echoed off concrete. The floor was wet from mopping, and the air smelled of bleach and metal. Marcus worked silently, sleeves rolled up, his reflection distorted in the shiny floor. His mind was calm, but his body was. Something inside him, an instinct he thought he'd buried years ago, was waking up. Every sound, every echo felt sharper, closer. He heard footsteps before he saw them. Slow, deliberate, 3 shadows stretched across the wall. He didn't turn around. He knew who it was. Brick's voice broke the silence. "You've been real quiet, champ." Marcus didn't move. "You don't want to do this." Brick laughed, low and cruel. "Oh, I do. See, this place runs on fear. You took that from me, and now I'm taking it back." He stepped forward, boots splashing in the puddle. Behind him, Crow and another man, Tito, followed, each holding something, a makeshift shank, a towel twisted tight like a rope. Marcus sighed softly and set the mop aside. "I don't want trouble." Brick smirked. "Too late." The first hit came from Crow, a swing meant to catch Marcus off guard. But Marcus moved faster than any man in that prison had ever seen. He dodged, the towel barely brushing his shoulder, and before Crow could react, Marcus's fist connected with his chest. A single, controlled hit that sent him staggering back into the wall, breathless. Brick froze for a second, not expecting that kind of speed. "Well, look at that," he said, grinning. "The champ still has some fight in him." Tito lunged next, the shank flashing under the flickering lights. Marcus grabbed his wrist mid-swing, twisting until the bone cracked. The weapon clattered to the floor. Tito screamed, falling to his knees, clutching his arm. Brick's grin faded. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. The man they came to humiliate wasn't scared. He was composed, deadly, and precise. Every movement Marcus made was efficient, almost mechanical. There was no rage, just control. Brick's pride burned hotter than his fear. He charged forward, swinging hard, catching Marcus across the face. Blood filled Marcus's mouth. For a second he tasted iron, felt the sting, the memory of the cage, the crowd, the lights, the sound of a heartbeat that wasn't his own. He closed his eyes and breathed once. Then everything snapped. He moved faster than thought, blocking Brick's next swing, driving an elbow into his ribs. The sound was dull and deep, the kind of sound that made everyone watching flinch. Brick stumbled, gasping for air, but Marcus didn't stop. The years of restraint, the months of silence, it all broke loose in a storm of precision and fury. Brick tried to fight back, throwing wild punches, but Marcus slipped through them like smoke, each counter clean and devastating. The last hit came without hesitation, a blow to the throat, followed by a takedown that slammed Brick against the floor with a crack that silenced everything. For a long moment, nobody moved. The hum of the lights filled the air again. Crow groaned, coughing on the floor. Tito whimpered, holding his arm. Marcus stood over Brick, chest heaving, his eyes empty. Brick wasn't moving. His head was turned to the side, eyes open, mouth slightly parted. The puddle of water beneath him slowly mixed with something darker. Marcus stared down, breathing hard. His hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the sudden realization of what he'd done. He'd spent years trying to control the violence inside him, and now it had come out again, raw, unstoppable. He knelt beside Brick, pressed his fingers to his neck. Nothing, just silence. Crow saw it too. His eyes went wide, panic flooding his face. Oh man, he's dead. You killed him." He crawled backward, slipping on the wet floor. Marcus didn't answer. He just sat there, staring at his bloodied hands. The sound of boots echoed from the hallway. The guard who'd been paid off had come back too soon. His flashlight beam cut through the dark, stopping on the scene, 3 men on the floor, one motionless, the other 2 barely conscious, and Marcus in the middle, calm as stone. "Jesus Christ," the guard breathed. "What the hell happened here?" Marcus looked up slowly. "They attacked me." The guard hesitated. He'd seen fights before, ugly, messy, loud, but nothing like this. Something was terrifying in how quiet Marcus was, how still. He reached for his radio, voice trembling. "Code red in lower corridor, medical emergency, inmate down." Within minutes, alarms blared. Red lights flashed across the hallway as guards flooded in. They dragged Marcus to his feet, cuffing him hard, shouting orders. He didn't resist. He didn't say a word. They pulled him past the body, and for a split second, his eyes met Brick's lifeless face. There was no triumph there, no satisfaction, just emptiness. As they led him away, Crow screamed after him, voice cracking. "You're dead, man, you hear me? You're dead." Marcus didn't look back. They threw him into solitary, the heavy door slamming shut behind him. The noise of the prison faded until there was only silence and the sound of his own breathing. He sat on the cold floor, his knuckles still stained red. His mind replayed every second, the look in Brick's eyes before he fell, the weight of his body hitting the ground, the final stillness. He hadn't meant to kill him, he just wanted it to stop, but it never stopped, not really. Outside, the rain kept falling. In the yard, rumors spread fast. Some said Marcus snapped, that he'd planned it. Others whispered that Brick finally picked the wrong man to mess with. Everyone agreed on one thing, the balance had shifted. By morning, Brick Matheson, king of the yard, was dead. And Marcus, the quiet new inmate, had become something else entirely. The guards avoided his cell. Even the other inmates kept their distance. In a place ruled by fear, Marcus had just become the new ghost story, the man who killed the unkillable. But inside that cell, Marcus didn't feel powerful. He felt empty. The silence he'd carried for so long now echoed louder than ever. He'd wanted peace. Instead, he'd become the very thing he'd spent his life running from. As the first light of dawn crept through the small barred window, he whispered to himself. It was supposed to end differently. The words disappeared into the cold air. Unheard by anyone but the man who had just crossed the line, he swore he never would. The morning after Brick's death, the prison was silent in a way it hadn't been in years. Even the usual clatter of metal doors and shouting guards seemed muted. The rumor had already spread before sunrise. Brick Matheson was dead, killed in the laundry corridor by the quiet new guy. Word traveled faster than truth ever could. Some said Marcus crushed his throat with one hand. Others said he tore him apart like an animal. The story changed with every retelling, but one thing stayed the same. Nobody was ever going to forget what happened that night. When the guards escorted Marcus out of solitary for questioning, every eye followed him. The men who once barked insults at newcomers now stood back, watching in silence. Even the ones who used to work under Brick kept their heads down. There was no cheering, no mocking, just an uneasy respect mixed with fear. Power had shifted overnight, and everyone could feel it. Marcus kept his head low, wrists chained, his face blank. Inside, he felt nothing. Not anger, not regret, just a hollow stillness, like his body was moving but his mind was somewhere else. The adrenaline that had carried him through the fight was gone now, replaced by a heavy weight that wouldn't lift. He was brought into a small gray room for questioning. Officer Dawson sat across from him, tired eyes studying his face. A tape recorder clicked on. "Marcus Reed," Dawson said quietly, "you know why you're here." Marcus nodded once. "Tell me what happened." Marcus looked at the table for a long moment. "They came at me," he said finally. "3 of them. I tried to walk away." Dawson leaned forward. "But you didn't walk away." Marcus's voice was calm. "No." "Did you mean to kill him?" Marcus hesitated. "No," he said, "but I didn't stop either." Dawson sighed, rubbing his temples. "You know what this means, right? Self-defense or not, you killed an inmate. They're gonna come down hard." Marcus didn't respond. He'd already made peace with that. Whatever came next couldn't be worse than what he'd already done to himself. Outside the room, the warden was fielding calls. News of the killing had leaked faster than they could contain it. Reporters were already circling, asking how a man with a background like Marcus Reed, a former world champion fighter, ended up in a general prison population. Someone had dug up his old career, his past victories, the one fight that ended in tragedy. The headlines were ruthless. Cage fighter kills again, violence follows him to prison. The world that once cheered his name now cursed it. His fans, long forgotten, split into 2 sides, those who believed he had been pushed too far, and those who said the monster had finally shown his true self. Back in Marcus's cell, the days blurred together. They moved him back to solitary for safety reasons, though everyone knew it was also for control. He spent 23 hours a day staring at concrete walls, trying to quiet the memories that wouldn't stop replaying. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Brick's face, that frozen look of surprise when the final hit landed. He didn't feel proud, he didn't feel justified, just empty. The silence he once used to protect himself now felt like punishment. Officer Dawson checked in on him more often than the others. Sometimes he'd bring him a book, sometimes just stand outside the cell. "You did what you had to," he said one night, leaning on the bars. "That man would have killed you if you didn't." Marcus didn't answer. He just stared ahead, voice low. "That doesn't make it right." Dawson sighed. "Right doesn't mean much in a place like this." Outside the prison, the story kept growing. News stations replayed old clips of Marcus in the ring, his knockouts, his championship belts, his stare before every fight. They turned the tragedy into entertainment, showing slow-motion footage of his final fight years ago, comparing it to Brick's death. The same crowd that once praised his control now called him dangerous, unfit for society. His sister Layla saw it all on TV. She hadn't spoken to Marcus in years, not since the night everything fell apart. Seeing his face again broke something inside her. She remembered the brother who used to protect her when they were kids, not the man the world called a killer. She tried writing him a letter, her hands shaking as she searched for words. "I don't know if you'll even get this," she wrote, "but I need you to know that you're still my brother. I don't care what they say. I know you never wanted this life." She mailed it the next morning, though she didn't know if he'd ever read it. Inside the prison, the balance shifted again. With Brick gone, his crew splintered. Some tried to take his place, others just stayed quiet, waiting for things to settle. But the fear never left. The guards walked the halls with their hands on their batons now, jumpier than before. Violence, once controlled by Brick's authority, now lurked in every shadow. Marcus didn't speak to anyone. He refused interviews, refused to explain. He knew anything he said would be twisted anyway. But one night, Dawson asked the question that no one else dared. "Why'd you come here, Marcus? You could have fought for parole, gone to a low-security place. Why take this?" Marcus looked at him through the bars. "Because I deserved it." Dawson frowned. "For defending yourself." Marcus shook his head slowly. "For what I did before, for the man who didn't get up in the ring." For the first time, Dawson saw it. The guilt that had been eating him alive long before Brick ever showed up. Weeks passed. The investigation concluded. The report confirmed what everyone already knew. Brick Matheson died from blunt force trauma to the throat and skull. The fight had been initiated by him and his men. Marcus had acted in self-defense, but the force he used was excessive. The official ruling kept him in solitary confinement indefinitely. It was the system's way of punishing him without saying it outright. But outside those walls, his story kept spreading. Documentaries, podcasts, online debates, everyone wanted to pick apart the man behind the crime. Some called him a tragic figure. Others said he was proof that violence never really leaves a man's soul. In one interview, Brick's sister spoke tearfully about how her brother was no saint but didn't deserve to die like that. "He was broken," she said. "They were both broken, just in different ways." Marcus never heard that interview, but he probably wouldn't have disagreed. Months later, Layla's letter finally reached him. The guard slid it through the slot and Marcus held it for a long time before opening it. He read it slowly, every word sinking deep. For the first time in months, his eyes softened. He folded the paper neatly and placed it under his pillow. That night, he didn't dream of the fight. He dreamed of the gym where it all began, the smell of sweat and leather, the sound of gloves hitting pads, his coach's voice reminding him to breathe. He saw himself younger, lighter, before everything went wrong. When he woke, the morning light crept through the small window, pale and cold. He sat up slowly, looking at his hands, now scarred and calloused. For the first time, he didn't see weapons. He saw what was left of a man still trying to find peace in a place that didn't allow it. Outside, the world had already moved on to new stories, new tragedies. But inside those walls, the echoes of that night would never fade. The men still whispered about him, the fighter who didn't want to fight, the man who killed the king of the yard. And in the quiet of his cell, Marcus sat with the truth, the kind that didn't need headlines or excuses. He hadn't meant to kill, but he had. He hadn't wanted power, but it found him. And now, all he had left was time to face what was left of himself. The courtroom was silent when Marcus, the hammer, Hill entered in shackles, his broad frame impossible to ignore. The same hands that once broke bones in the octagon now trembled as they clinked against the steel cuffs. The guards flanked him tightly, though they knew, everyone knew, if Marcus wanted to, he could end them all in seconds. But there was no fight left in him now. The man who had once been the deadliest fighter in MMA history was no longer a champion. He was a prisoner, a murderer, and a man whose quiet strength had turned into something dark, the moment violence became his only way to survive. The judge's voice echoed through the room as the charges were read aloud: manslaughter, aggravated assault, destruction of property, and reckless endangerment. Each word felt like another stone being dropped on Marcus's chest. The prosecution painted him as a monster, a man so violent that even in confinement, he couldn't control his rage. The defense argued that he acted in self-defense, that the system failed to protect him from the very predators it bred inside its walls. The truth sat somewhere in between, tangled in shades of gray. When the verdict came, 10 years with the possibility of parole after 5, the room split in two. Some gasped, others whispered that it wasn't enough. The family of the dead inmate cried out in anger. Marcus didn't flinch, he didn't look back, he only asked softly to address the court. "I never wanted to fight again," he said, his voice deep and steady. "But in that place you fight or you die. I didn't choose violence, it chose me long before that day." The judge said nothing, only nodded. Marcus was led away, his fate sealed. But the trial didn't end with his sentencing. The story had already escaped the courtroom and flooded the outside world. News outlets called it the fighter in chains. Commentators debated whether Marcus Hill was a hero or a killer. Social media split in two. Some saw him as a symbol of survival, others as a cautionary tale of power gone unchecked. The footage from the prison cameras had leaked, grainy but enough to show the brutality. The attack, the defense, the speed, the fear. The world watched the moment a bully met the wrong man, and the wrong man lost his freedom for it. In the weeks that followed, documentaries began to dig into his life. They showed his rise from poverty, his rise through MMA, and his fall from fame. They talked about the death of his mother, the corruption in the prison system, and the mental toll of violence. The narrative shifted again. People began to see Marcus not just as an inmate, but as a mirror reflecting a broken system. A system that celebrated violence in the cage but condemned it in the cell. Inside prison, Marcus changed. The anger that once drove him became something quieter, something he used to guide others. He began training younger inmates in discipline, teaching them the same lessons his first coach taught him: control, respect, and patience. "Violence isn't power," he'd tell them. "It's what you do after it that matters." Some listened, others didn't. But even the guards started noticing. Fights stopped breaking out where Marcus walked. He had turned from predator to peacekeeper, a strange redemption within concrete walls. But outside, the story took on a life of its own. Activists began using his case to highlight racial disparities in the justice system. They argued that if Marcus had been white, or if the bully had been black, the outcome might have been different. They questioned how prisons continued to allow abuse to go unchecked until it erupted into tragedy. Former fighters spoke out too, saying that the sport trained men to survive war but gave them no tools to survive peace. It was a conversation about what happens when you teach someone to destroy, and then expect them to simply exist. The bully's family, meanwhile, remained shattered. They couldn't understand how their son, despite his violent history, could be killed in a place meant to keep him contained. They blamed the system, the guards, and Marcus. Their pain was raw, their grief bottomless, and though Marcus understood their anger, he could never undo what happened. "There's no win in what I did," he said once during an interview years later. "It's just something I have to live with." When his parole hearing came 5 years later, Marcus stood in front of the board, older, quieter, but still carrying the weight of his past. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said. "I just want peace, not the kind you get by being left alone, but the kind that comes from not being afraid anymore." They granted his release. The warden shook his hand before he left and said, "You survived the system, Hill, don't come back." Freedom didn't feel like victory, it felt like emptiness. He walked out into a world that had moved on, one that recognized his name but not his face. He found work teaching self-defense to at-risk youth, trying to give them the tools he never had, the ability to control fear before it controlled them. He spoke in schools on small stages, never about fighting, but about surviving. "The fight," he said, "isn't in the ring or the yard, it's inside you. And if you don't learn to tame it, it'll eat you alive." The story of Marcus Hill became something larger than the man himself. It was about what happens when a system built on punishment meets a man built on survival. It raised questions that society didn't want to answer. How do we treat those who fight back when they were never meant to win? How do we define justice in a world where the lines between defense and destruction blur so easily? Years later, an article called him the man who killed to stay alive. It painted his story as both tragedy and warning, a reminder that no one, no matter how strong, walks away from violence unchanged. The same fists that once made him a legend also chained him to a past he couldn't escape. But unlike the ring, there was no crowd cheering, no victory bell, just silence and the long road of redemption ahead. In the end, justice wasn't a verdict or a sentence. It was the choice to keep living without hate. Marcus did that quietly, humbly, knowing that forgiveness wasn't owed to him. What his story left behind was a truth that lingered. Power without control destroys, and sometimes, even the strongest man must lose everything before he learns how to be free.